Good morning. I'm Jennifer Rabb and have the incredible privilege of being the president of Hunter College, where the American dream still comes true. And let's give that a round of applause, right? On behalf of our Jonathan Fenton director, Harold Holzer, and all of us at Hunter College, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this timely and important discussion on the future of our city. There could be no better venue for this discussion than here in Roosevelt House, the home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt for 25 years before they moved to that other famous house in Washington. The house was a wedding gift from Franklin's mother, Sarah, who shared it with them, frequently to Eleanor's distress, and some of you might have thought you had mother-in-law issues. One of the features rare in private homes at the time was an elevator, which she put in when she built it in 1908, which proved invaluable after FDR's legs were paralyzed by polio. So it was this house that allowed him to regain and maintain his public stature. And it was in this house that Franklin received the news that he'd been elected governor of New York in 1928, and then in 1932 that he'd been elected president of the United States. Franklin delivered his first radio address to the nation as president-elect from the second floor study, his first fireside chat. It was in these rooms during the presidential transition, which in those days lasted until March when the inauguration was held, that FDR and his brain trust developed many of the programs that would change America. In other words, the New Deal was hatched here. Think about this today as you engage with our extraordinary speakers. In this house was born child labor protection, the WPA, unemployment insurance, the list goes on. In one especially dramatic meeting, FDR asked Frances Perkins, who was his labor secretary when he was governor, to become the first woman cabinet member in American history. She agreed, but she was a feisty sort, and she said that she would only agree if FDR accepted her vision for a social safety net. And thus, in this house, the program we know as Social Security was born. Today, this home is the home to Hunter's Public Policy Institute, where we carry out Roosevelt's dedication to public service through our human rights and public policy programs, as well as hosting major discussions like that today. And so, now looking out at the audience, I am tempted to say that this is the most impressive gathering of political and public policy brainpower ever to gather at Roosevelt House since the days FDR and Eleanor dined here alone. Speaking of history, we are gathered here today by one of New York's most historic institutions, the Association for a Better New York. ABNY, of course, played an absolutely pivotal role in getting our city through the 70s fiscal crisis, and in the half a century since, it has remained dedicated to keeping our city strong and growing. Now, New York stands at another critical moment in its history, and once again, ABNY is stepping up to the plate to help advance us. I have been so lucky over the many years to be a part of the ABNY family, and so I am delighted to welcome the association and this distinguished audience to Roosevelt House this morning. We are especially fortunate to have with us 4 visionary public officials this morning who are laser focused on the challenges that face New York. If the times call for fresh thinking, then these borough presidents, newly elected, full of ideas, and determined to bring about change, are the right people in the right place at the right time. It is a pleasure to welcome our Borough President, Mark Levine, Borough President of Manhattan, who represents Hunter. We like to call him our president, especially when we're dialing for dollars. Mark is very frequently on our campus. He'll be here soon to celebrate Women's History Month, and he's just one of the great ardent supporters of affordable higher education and a great friend to CUNY. It's a personal pleasure for me to welcome the extraordinary Vanessa Gibson, the first woman and first African-American to be Bronx Borough President. I'm a Bronx girl, so I feel very much happy to welcome you to home, Vanessa. A special welcome to Donovan Richards of Queens. We have a very big place in our heart, Borough President, because you send us from Queens more students than any other borough, so we love that. And to welcome Vito Fosella. So you are a smaller borough, but I want to say that for our Macaulay Honors Program, Staten Island Tech just rocks it. And last year, their valedictorian turned down MIT and Columbia to pick Macaulay Hunter Honors Program, so pretty cool, right? I want to give a very big shout out to one of the great citizens and leaders in New York, the wonderful Melvin Miller. So we don't the CEO of ABNY, who just keeps us moving and on our toes. And then, of course, I'm delighted to welcome ABNY's outstanding president and chairman, Steve Rubenstein. You might say that both of you have just created incredible service to our city, and Stephen, ABNY and leadership are truly in your DNA. You follow in the footsteps of your extraordinary father, Howard, who, of course, was one of the city's most devoted boosters in the last fiscal crisis. And Steve, you had very, very big shoes to fill, but everybody in this room knows you have done it superbly. And it's really an honor for you, all of us at ABNY, to have you as our chair and as our president, and to admire what you've done both at ABNY and at your firm. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Steve Rubenstein for his incredible leadership of ABNY.
Thank you, Jennifer. First for hosting us today, but mostly for just being the fierce Jennifer Rabb, like fierce advocate for higher education, fierce advocate for Hunter, fierce advocate for the middle class, and really for our city. And you've been such an incredible public servant. I want to say how grateful we are and thrilled to have you in our ABNY community. On behalf of Melvin and me, we want to thank you all for braving the slush and being here today. I've got two quick jobs. First, I'm going to say I'm excited we have a wonderful moderator today, Greg David from the city. We all know Greg's work. He is truly prolific and has a long history of insightful and sort of really like transformative commentary about the issues that we're going to be talking about today: jobs, housing, and economic growth. We all know him to be someone of great integrity. There couldn't be a better person to lead this conversation. We're also thrilled to have the Borough Presidents with us here today. We are one city, but we have five, and represented by four today, wonderfully different boroughs. They all have unique characteristics. We all have strengths, and we all have things we can learn from each other, and truly like ways to partner that I think are really important. So just briefly, Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson has been a powerful advocate for expanding workforce development and WMB contract to help the Bronx confront persistent high employment. Queens Borough President Donovan Richards has done some amazing work on land use, championing mixed-use projects like the Innovation Queens campus and the revitalization of Far Rockaway, creating new housing and economic hubs for the borough. Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine just released a plan that identifies development sites for 73,000 new apartments in this borough. The fact that Mark found space for more homes in Manhattan is kind of a miracle. Staten Island Borough President Vito Fosella, six-term congressman before he was borough president, self-proclaimed, likes bread and butter issues for his borough, and they range for things including starting to restart development in the old site where the wheel was going to go in Staten Island, to trying to make transit better out in Staten Island. I want to thank you all for being here. We're really grateful for your public service and grateful for being part of this conversation. I want to invite you over onto the stage. I'm going to turn it over to Greg. Thank you.
So I'd like to begin with an overview of the New York City economy. The Adams administration likes to say that the city has regained 97% of the jobs lost in the pandemic. Doesn't seem too bad, does it? But that's really not the right number and the right way to look at it. The city has regained only 88% of the jobs lost. And why do I say only? Because the nation as a whole has regained all the jobs lost in the pandemic, and as of January, added 1 million more. Maybe more telling is that the official forecasts from the administration, the Independent Budget Office, and the Comptroller all put the full recovery from the pandemic in late 2024. By then, the nation will be millions of jobs ahead of where it was when the pandemic began. So I'd like to start with each of you giving us an assessment of the state of your boroughs with the economy and what you think needs to be done to improve it. I'll start in Manhattan, because Manhattan has seen the biggest job loss, but probably the least impact on its residents because it has the lowest unemployment rate. Mr. Borough President?
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you, ABNY, Steve, and Melva. Really appreciate this organization. You have in your DNA the fact that you will never give up on New York City. You didn't give up in the 70s. I know you're not going to give up now. And to have you as this convener of the civic conversation is just incredibly important to New York. So thank you. Thank you to the 5th president in the room, President Raab. We already miss you, but grateful for your leadership and your friendship, and Howard as well. Most of all, I love taking this show on the road with my fellow borough presidents. And I'm really excited to be here with all of you. We're close friends and colleagues. I'm sure that'll become very, very apparent in our discussion. Greg, I think I'm going to have a little bit of a more positive spin on your question.
The Adams administration will be thrilled.
Okay. Well, someone let them know.
It is budget.
I would say that despite the fact that we have not had a full return of in-person office work, despite the fact that some parts of the tourism picture are not yet back, China, for example, and other headwinds that we're facing, we are almost at pre-pandemic levels. And I think we're probably going to hit that and exceed it very soon. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. We do have sectors which are booming, like life sciences and tech. We have tourism, which, while not quite at pre-pandemic levels, has really come roaring back. We had 56 million visitors last year, which is incredible. The foot traffic in Times Square, for example, is already at pre-pandemic levels, basically, and we're going to beat those numbers, all of those numbers, this year. So I'm very bullish about the future of the borough and the city, but there's also work to do. There's no doubt. We've got to do better on public transportation. People have to feel safe coming to work. They have to feel that it's an efficient, well-run system. We have much more work to do on that. We've got to do more to uplift parts of the borough and the city which are often left behind in economic development. We need much more investment uptown to unlock that economic potential. When we do those things, I am very confident that this will continue to be a borough and a city where people want to live, to work, to visit, to study, to see a show. And that means we will continue to be an economic engine for the country. I'm extremely confident of that if we tackle the challenges that we're laying out today. So we will report back to the mayor that I just gave a very big booster talk about the borough of Manhattan and the city. Thank you, Greg. Back
You're
to you.
welcome. And now I want to turn to the Bronx, which, while it didn't have the biggest job losses, saw the most impact with an unemployment rate that soared close to 20%, is still twice as high as any other borough in the city. So.
Thank you, Greg,
Madam
and
Borough
certainly
President.
thank you, everyone, President, Melva, Steve. Thank you to ABNY for hosting us. It's always great to be in a space where I can talk about the blueprint and the vision for the great borough of the Bronx, and certainly to my colleagues, my BPs. What folks don't understand is we actually get along, we talk, and we really strategize together. We've done op-eds together, we've been on panels, really talking about the approach that we're taking to move our respective boroughs forward. So representing the Bronx and realizing that pre-pandemic we were at about 7.5% in unemployment. During the pandemic in early 2020, we were a little over 25%. And now, post-pandemic, we are at 7.5. We're still the highest of the 5 boroughs. And I think it speaks volumes to a lot of the challenges that the Bronx continues to face. When you talk about economic development, when you talk about revamping job sectors that were decimated during the pandemic, a lot in the retail and hotel industry, a lot of service workers that were laid off that have not come back fully. Some are coming back gradually. What we're doing as Borough President is, first, we've released our strategic policy statement last September. And tomorrow, we are announcing a series of new efforts and new initiatives in our first State of the Borough 2023. And we're excited because we're looking at a lot of opportunities that are going to create good paying union jobs. We know that that is the pathway to the middle class. It is the pathway to economic prosperity. When you look at what's happening in the East Bronx with the Metro North expansion in 4 neighborhoods, in Co-op City, Hunts Point, Morris Park, and Parkchester Van Ness. It's going to be transformative to create jobs, to stimulate the economy, to support small businesses. We are also revamping our Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, which is now led by Rob Walsh, who used to be the SBS commissioner under Mayor Bloomberg, and we are revamping it. We are making sure we are getting our CDFIs up and running, our MDIs. We're working with the state, with Governor Hochul. We're doing a lot to create jobs, a lot of capital projects that are going to bring real access and opportunity. So it's not easy because we are seeing a lot of residents coming in with different skill sets. So we're embracing the tech industry. We're embracing the gaming industry, the cannabis industry. We just had the first cannabis showroom in the Bronx several months ago with the Bronx Community Foundation. So we're looking at new industries, and we are preparing for future jobs and workforce development. And the final piece is a huge piece. It's the Kingsbridge Armory. It's the largest armory in the world, and it's been vacant for many years. And we are reimagining the armory. We have a new effort working with EDC and working with the elected officials, and we're going to really revamp it from a cultural, tourism, small business, food equity, healthcare, recreation, and small business perspective. We have certain buckets that we want to meet. In anything we do, decisions we make on land use and ULURP applications, we want housing, we want jobs, we want tourism, we want MWBE provision, local opportunities. There are certain things for me that are non-negotiable. And my staff knows that when we have conversations with developers, these are things we expect them to meet as a minimum, but we also expect the standards to be raised. So we're getting there. 7.5% is a huge step of progress, considering we were at 25% just a few years ago. But everything we're doing really has the concept of creating good-paying jobs.
Thank you. Let's check in next with Queens.
Going to Queens.
Well, Greg, I got to correct a statement you made earlier. Queens actually has the lowest unemployment rate in the city as we speak. And when I came in, we were somewhere around 26%, 27%. We are at about 4.8% now. And you ask yourself, you know, why and how have we made this progress, being the epicenter of the epicenter? And you sort of look at this infusion of capital happening across the borough. One, the redevelopment of our airports. Everybody's singing the praises of LaGuardia Airport, but now we've moved on to JFK Airport, the redevelopment of Terminal 1, and then we just broke ground with the governor on Terminal 6. I kept JetBlue in Queens. It was my first fight as borough president. So you look at this infusion of close to $18 billion in capital, and a lot of that investment seeping into MWBEs, in which I'm very happy. I just got my report, so I got to see the progress we're making in terms of making sure that 30 to 40% of small businesses, especially MWBEs across the borough, have a place at the table. And then you fast forward. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things happening across the borough. Redevelopment of Willards Point. We have a soccer stadium coming in we're working with the administration on. We have Resorts World, and I will say, if you're going to gamble on any casinos in New York City, they all need to be in Queens. So we work very closely with Steve Cohen. And matter of fact, Steve Cohen really was helpful when we came in, because we've always talked about leveraging public and private partnerships, and we were able to secure about $15 million from Steve Cohen and use that as grant dollars to put into small businesses who were on the cusp of closing. So 799 businesses were able to receive grants of upwards of $20,000 from Steve in Alexandria, love Alexandria, Cohen, she's a good friend, and who's really into philanthropic endeavors. So it's really been a good time in terms of land use as well. We obviously got Innovation Queens over the line, but now we're working with the state on the Creedmoor campus, which I'm really excited about, and we have some other rezonings in the pipeline as well. I'll end in also just saying, I know everybody was heartbroken in the room over Amazon, but we will revisit conversations, and I was just down touring the Annabelle Basin last week to really start that conversation of how we develop the waterfront again in Western Queens. So I'm really excited about the future of Queens and all of the good projects that are happening. And then on top of it, just to make sure that we create a borough where it's live, work, and play, really taking those investments we get from the mayor. It is budget season, and I love Mayor Adams because I've been
I do
able to
too.
infuse close to like $130 million in my first 2 years into hospitals, into schools, into parks, and that's the way you really build the outer boroughs, even though we hate to use that word, but really, the outer boroughs are becoming cities amongst themselves. So how do we continue to invest in a way that creates a live, work, and play space? And I see Matthew Washington. We'll talk about the Rockaways later, but it's booming.
Thank you, and we'll wrap up today with Staten Island.
To your point, I'm bullish on New York City, Staten Island, and the boroughs because of people like this, because they believe that New York City still is the greatest city in the world. And if we provide and create and foster a climate of innovation and creativity and hard work and productivity, then nobody's going to stop us. And looking back through the prism of time, I would say sitting here, I have to think about people who've come before me. And as an example, my great-grandfather represented Staten Island in Congress in the 30s and actually voted to create the Social Security system in the 1930s. And why I bring that up is, I'm here because of the sacrifices of my family and people who came before me. But when we want to, we can do magnificent things. And the Social Security system is a magnificent thing. And now we're called upon to do magnificent things in 2023. And if we look back just a few years ago, we're coming up practically on the anniversary of COVID, where the world went, where the country went, where the city went. Very, very bad places. And yet we're back, and we're here. In the early 90s, the city was going through some very tumultuous times, and people stepped up, took the city back, and we thrived. We all go into schools on a regular basis, so if you ever want to, if you're down and out, go into a school and talk to 3rd and 4th and 5th graders. And you want to get pumped up, those kids are alive and well, and they want to do well. So what we can do is focus on the positive, focus on the needs that create an economic climate that's safe. People feel personally secure, economically secure. If reflexively the answer is to tax and to regulate and to punish business owners, at least here, and I think my colleagues, I can't speak for them, but I think they share this, we push back against that and let these small business owners thrive. And the thing we can do is to invest in education, whether it be higher education. Yesterday I was telling some folks here that we had College of Staten Island is a public institution, part of CUNY on Staten Island. 50-plus years ago, it was something called the Willowbrook campus, which was a disaster. Anybody take the time to read. You talk about a transformation from something, Willowbrook, which was a disaster, to now a place where thousands of young people go to learn and to grow and to believe. And I think that's what we can do. We can create a climate to allow younger people to believe in themselves and to do whatever life puts in their way. So I am very bullish. I'm not focused so much, frankly, on percentages and can change from here to there. But if we believe long-term that our young people and others can do wonderful things, then we will be a better place 10, 20, 50 years from now.
Thank you. I am focused on percentages, I'm afraid. And I have two sets of percentages I want to ask you about and ask you what we can do about it. The unemployment rate for black New Yorkers in the fourth quarter was 11.1%. The unemployment rate for white New Yorkers was 2.8%. And maybe most significant, the national black unemployment rate is only a little over 5%. What's the problem, and what do we need to do about these very troubling numbers? And I'll throw it open to anyone who wants to take it.
Okay, so let me start with, there's an old saying that when America gets a cold, black and brown communities get pneumonia, and that's a fact. So the pandemic obviously hit many pockets, the Bronx, parts of Southeast Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island. When you look at the correlation between crime in these areas, right, there's always same correlation, right? High unemployment, disinvestment in communities. So we spent a lot of time in my office really focusing in on this. And I came from a very rough place. I lived in Far Rockaway, and probably had the highest crime rate when I took office in the council, and historically has had, there's been a perception about Far Rockaway. Now, last year, Far Rockaway was one of 2 precincts with a drop in crime in the city, a 10% drop. And I'm like Vito, I hate to use percentages because these are lives we're talking about. But you look at what we've done out here, and I pointed to Matthew Washington being here. I mean, the historic levels of investment in affordable housing, good policing, community policing that actually works with the community. Then you add in the development happening and tying in the jobs pieces, CBOs being at the table, and that's how you create success in communities. And the state comptroller recently released a report on the Rockaways, and actually we did see a drop in unemployment there. Still not where we need to be, certainly, but certainly some progress there. So I talked about the airport. I talked about many of these projects happening around Queens. And one of the things we're doing is we talked about JFK as well, is how do we leverage this development happening across our borough to make sure that we're focusing in on the pockets of the borough that have historically had the highest unemployment. So even having second chance projects, programs, you know, at JFK, historically, you know, if you have a record, you cannot work at an airport. But we've found some creative ways, and there's a young man who's running this program who did time on Rikers Island, you know, who's running this program to give people second chance opportunities as well. I talked about the investments in MWBEs because they are more likely to hire from the community. So we have to really think strategically, and in terms of the city budget, making sure, of course, more summer youth employment is happening. All of these things have to work in tandem. But I'll end before I pass it over to Vanessa in saying, as the borough president now getting around, and I'm from Southeast Queens and Rockaway, you know, I knew there was disinvestment, but when you go into these schools, you see the school to prison pipeline. You see the disinvestment. So we really are using the power of this office, working with the mayor, although I joke about that, to really ensure that we're investing in the things that we need to. New community centers we're going to build, a $140 million community center at Roy Wilkins. We're building a new precinct in Queens as well, the 116th, but that will have a community center space in it as well. So we can do some programming in it along with having the department there. So we really have to think about employment. You want to get a gun out of somebody's hand, you better give them a job. You got to have something to replace that gun with, otherwise we're spinning our wheels. So a lot of work to be done, but systematic racism is why we're here.
Very troubling that we have such high unemployment rate among African American men. I think we need a creative and innovative approach, and I think we really need to look at jobs as the greatest equalizer. So if you think about African American young males, young adults that are out of school, that have been denied opportunities, doors closed, and really not given a fair shake, a level playing field. Many of them have been involved in the criminal justice system, and they face a lot of barriers to employment. And even as they enter employment, some of them are exploited. So I think about auto workers and repair shops that hire people of color but exploit them because they don't know their rights. So I believe in what we're doing in the Bronx is working with credible messengers and trusted partners, organizations like Fortune Society, Cases, CEO, Osborne Association, that are working with formerly incarcerated young men coming home from prison and creating a pipeline of re-entering our society, giving them jobs and stable housing and offering support around mental health and wraparound services and really trauma-informed care, because many of them have been traumatized. They have been in a system that has been broken, that has not been fair to them, and it's hard to re-enter a society when you feel like you're not given that level playing field. And so looking at the new job sector from a tech perspective, and also making sure that we're looking at the younger population of young African-American males too. So we are grateful to have in our office President Obama's initiative, My Brother's Keeper, And MBK has done phenomenal work. We are creating My Sister's Keeper as well, because as a woman, I want to make sure we take care of young ladies as well. But a lot of the job sectors do not favorably look at African American young men. There's a lot of discrimination, there's systemic racism, and we have to turn around those numbers. I often say we have to take statistics and make them success stories. So when we look at these new job opportunities, we have to demand that young men of color are hired. They are given a leg up, they are given an opportunity through local hiring and MWBE provisions, and we cannot accept anything less. The greatest equalizer for us are jobs and pathways to the middle class and stability, because we know if you want to transform your community, if you want to address gun violence and all of the plagues and epidemics that we experience, the greatest thing we can invest in is a job. When you give a young adult a job, you transform their life. You allow them to do something different. You can't tell young people to do something different if you don't offer them something different. So MBK, MSK, a lot of internship opportunities we're looking at, and we're going into these same communities that have historically been marginalized and denied opportunities, and we're working with trusted partners that are credible messengers that really can talk to young adults in a way they understand and in a way that really captivates them, so that we know that they are the next generation of young leaders in our city.
Thank you. I know I've heard the word tech mentioned a few times here. So I wrote about a major ABNY and Tech NYC report over the summer on the great ecosystem. And no surprise, it showed enormous gains over the last decade in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and virtually nothing elsewhere. So I'd like the three of you to talk about whether it is possible to grow tech jobs in your borough and why it hasn't been happening up to now. And I'll start with Queens, which everyone had such great hopes about, not only because of Amazon, but because Cornell Techion was supposed to be a great feeder into Queens. And the ABNY report showed that in the last decade, very little had happened.
Yeah, and this is something that we're really working hard on, and hats off to my deputy borough president, Ebony Young, who's spearheaded this initiative. We launched the Queens Innovation Tech Initiative with the Queens Economic Development Corporation. And I'll tell you, we just held, and for those who don't know, only I think less than 20% of the sector is black and brown. So we did something different. We launched this initiative and just last month held our first tech fair. And we held it in Jamaica for a reason, because we wanted to ensure that the neighborhoods that historically have been left behind in these conversations had a place at the table. And I'm talking about Saturday morning at 8 a.m., Melva. We had over 600 people attend. Let me say that again. 600 individuals attended this tech fair. And, you know, we had everybody from Google to Amazon. I mean, you name it, we had the gamut there. But to go a step further, we also launched a tech competition, and we've had over, I think, 200 people apply, and we leveraged some private capital that we raised as well for this. In a few weeks, we'll actually announce the winners, which will be probably about 5. So we raised about $100,000 in capital, and that's going to enable about 20 for each awardee to get about $20,000 towards startup money. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. But there's a lot of work that has to be done. You know, we're speaking with the Economic Development Corporation about creating innovation zones, for instance, up in Western Queens. I'm not willing to forfeit. And what happened with Amazon is a travesty. You know, I was down at Queensbridge Houses just this weekend, and I'm saying, look at the opportunities we could have leveraged. The talent is there. How are we leveraging and creating the opportunities for folks in these communities? So we're now working with EDC on that, and we'll have a few other huge initiatives that come up as well in the future. You know, we're talking to them once again about zoning and other opportunities, and really anxious to get back in that conversation to develop that waterfront in Western Queens. But in the meantime, you know, we're doing everything we can with the Department of Small Business Services, leveraging capital dollars to make sure that the communities that have been left out of this conversation are part of it. And I'll end in just saying life sciences is also something that's evolving in Long Island City as well. And we need to see more capital poured in from the city and the state and the feds in this area as well. So still a lot of work to be done. But what I will say is seeing those 600 faces up on a Saturday at 8 a.m. Has motivated us to even do more in this space to correct the disparities.
Borough President Fosella, when I was doing my story, the person who wrote the report actually said to me, Staten Island is too residential to build a tech center. What we have to hope for is residents from Staten Island get tech jobs elsewhere. Do you agree with that? And if not, what would you like to see happen?
Well, to generalize, yeah, I mean, Staten Island is much more residential, suburban in its look. But we actually have, over the years, have consciously shifted away from promoting more residential development and open up sectors of Staten Island to jobs. For those, just by a show of hands, who's here from Staten Island? All right. I love it. I love it. So we are the smallest borough, but we have the most enthusiastic residents. I think that's awesome. Thank you. So we call it the West Shore of Staten Island, and probably 20 years ago, there was a desire to open it up to residential development, and there was a decision made by a group of us who said, no, let's try to open up it as a sort of a jobs coast. And since then, there's been tremendous amount of growth in economic opportunities. Buildings are sprouting up. Amazon is, at any point in the year, could be one of the largest employers on Staten Island. And we have looked for ways to collaborate with those types of businesses. And College of Staten Island, for example, Amazon has a program where they'll pay for the education. So as we speak, I think there's about $500,000 in scholarships that Amazon is paying for College of Staten Island graduates. So those students have a pipeline into that organization. And the short answer is no. I think we don't have to just push people out. In fact, we started a campaign. Mark and Vanessa were there a few weeks ago in Staten Island, called Stay on Staten Island, where there's this temptation to say, I live on Staten Island, but I have to work elsewhere. We're very proud of what we have, and we're trying to encourage people to think twice about that you can stay on Staten Island to work, stay on Staten Island to dine, to enjoy culture, to enjoy nature. And there's a 2.5-mile stretch along the North Shore waterfront from the St. George Ferry Terminal towards the Verrazano Bridge that has been really not too cool. The New York Ferris wheel site, as was mentioned earlier, is now dead. There was about $1 billion poured into that project, and it's desolate. And there are little pockets along the waterfront that are just jewels, and everybody here can appreciate it. Brooklyn waterfront has been revitalized tremendously. Queens and the Bronx, Jersey City, Hoboken, Bayonne, and there's this 2.5-mile stretch along Staten Island that overlooks New York Harbor, Statue of Liberty, the skyline, Brooklyn. Wonderful opportunities, and we've been focusing for the last year with Mayor Adams, who's been terrific, EDC, and a local council member to create a blueprint to allow that to be developed for things like tech jobs. So the answer is I don't necessarily agree with that. While that may be the case right now, we're trying to change that perception and change the reality.
Can I just jump? Oh.
Yes, I want to know what the chances are of building tech jobs in the Bronx. Yes.
So we are very adamant and very intentional about addressing the digital divide and creating connectivity for families. I think during the pandemic, it was very apparent that many families were disconnected, especially older adults and seniors who were not able to connect with loved ones and family members. If you think about the digital divide and its impact on our public school students as well, we were out there giving out laptops and desktops, working with organizations in the Bronx like Perscolas and the Bronx Community Foundation. We're working with the Digital Equity Coalition right now to look at tech hubs and looking at space in the Kingsbridge Armory, but also around the Bronx and neighborhoods we know, community districts that we know have been disconnected for quite some time. And we're looking at it from a career and workforce development perspective, jobs, stimulating the economy, but also what it can do for the young generation. Young people are tech savvy and they know Instagram, TikTok, Reels, they know it all. But think about the mechanism behind the tech industry, the jobs that are created. So we're looking at building out the industry through a new Bronx STEAM center. Brooklyn has one, the Bronx doesn't have one, we will get one. And we're also looking at a lot of the jobs that can be created. The East Bronx, where Montefiore and Einstein campuses are, we're looking at research, because I think that's another industry where we want to build more jobs and really create access and opportunities. So a lot is happening. I ask all of you to watch, wait and see. We have a lot of opportunities, a lot of public-private partnerships. We've been working with AT&T and Optimum and Verizon and many others that are already in the Bronx, asking them to work with us on connectivity, because we realize that government cannot save us when it comes to tech. You have to look at Google and other private sector industries and getting them to look at the attractiveness of coming to places like the Bronx. So we're working on that, because we do want to address the digital divide and make sure that all families should be connected. It is something that should be universal, and it's not today. And because it's not, that means that our work still remains undone.
So the big winner in this can have a thing.
Well, there's something that all of us have to work on, even though the sector's growing. It's growing in part because young talent graduating from MIT and Stanford wants to live in New York City. They don't want to live in the suburbs. And so companies that want to attract that talent have to locate here. But far too few of the best jobs in this sector, the six-figure jobs, are going to kids from New York. Far too few of these jobs are going to public school graduates. And that is, in part, a huge failure of the public school system. And as Donovan said, there's no shortage of talent here. There's a shortage of opportunity. I think only 1 in 5 public schools in New York City has a robotics program. The vast majority of public schools in New York City have no certified computer science teachers. If there is computer science, it's being taught by a teacher from another discipline who sort of took it upon themselves. And most kids, most years, are not getting coding or any of the other kind of hard disciplines that just open up a whole landscape of careers, including for kids who might not go to college, because not every kid is going to, but there are kids with tech skills who can still land really good paying jobs in the sector. And the city has to do much, much better at investing, beginning in kindergarten, for these emerging careers, so that the jobs start going to our graduates, our public school kids. That's true in Manhattan too, so we all have work to do.
Thank you. So I think it was last week you were all on a panel at Rebney, and you all said that housing was a great crisis in New York and we needed to build more. So I am going to ask you about the specific proposals on the table and whether you support them or not. So we'll do raised hands if the answer is yes.
Lightning round.
Yes, it is a lightning round. I want to see whether we have any controversy here. Find an economic way to allow the legalization of basement apartments and other accessory dwelling units, which is most likely going to affect Queens most of all.
I'm a basement baby. I was born to teenage parents, so no shame in saying, hell yeah, build them out.
But a qualifier, are you talking state imposed?
State imposed.
No.
4-1 on that one. Require each community district to increase the housing stock by 3% over the next few years and allow more affordable housing.
Amen.
No, because?
Staten
We're on a
Island.
case-by-case basis.
But wait, so that's the
I said
answer.
before, I'm not for
On a
percentages.
case-by-case basis, you look at these, I saw these maps that the Furman Center did, and Staten Island is one of them, colored with with the color that there's not any new housing and there's not any new affordable housing in those areas.
As I said, I'm not big on percentages, but we are a community that just sort of takes it on a case-by-case basis. People want to come to Staten Island. We adjust the zoning to be consistent with the character and integrity of existing neighborhoods. That's what people on balance want on Staten Island, and that's what I'm for.
Here's a very controversial one. Reinstate a version of the 421A tax break to build residential housing with affordable housing requirements, yes or no?
with a deeper understanding that there needs to be deeper affordability in it. And I won't compromise on that. But yes, as long as the version does better, yes.
I'm a big lean yes.
A lean yes. Reinstate a version of the J51 housing tax break to encourage renovation.
I carried that bill.
Well, we have unanimity there. Pass good cause eviction to end the ability of landlords not to renew a lease for any reason, and to cap rent increases in market rate apartments to 1.5 times the inflation rate.
Too complicated.
Too complicated to do or too complicated to have a position on?
I like it.
That wasn't a perfect recitation of the
Yeah,
actual
exactly.
version.
It's pretty
that's probably
close.
going to be in the budget.
It's pretty close.
But I
Well,
think
you want to
some-
restate it and tell me your position? Restate it.
Well, look, in Manhattan, you have very few low-income and working-class people in market rate apartments at this point, tragically, because they've been priced out. But absolutely, there needs to be more protections for that segment of the rental population. And I think that the version that I've heard is making its way into the budget in Albany, I think gives the right balance to protect vulnerable tenants in a way that won't inhibit future housing production, because we all care about that. So I think with the right balance, and my sense is they're going to get there, yes, I support it.
Agreed. With the right balance, I support.
With the right balance, and I'll just say, because during the pandemic, you know, you did have some individuals, and because we're a homeowner community, especially in Southeast Queens, I'll be walking in the park and, you know, I would hear those complaints from some of the homeowners. So just making sure that we really strike the right balance, of course, I would be there to support, but we do need to do more.
So I want your opinion on all of this, but this is mostly affecting Mr. Levine. Convert office buildings into residential by increasing the allowed floor area ratio, and in particular allowing residential construction in the garment center.
Yes to all. We have a
No
huge-
buts, no buts, just yes to all.
I'm going to elaborate, but this is a huge opportunity for us, first on the manufacturing space. It does surprise people that huge swaths of the borough of Manhattan are still zoned for manufacturing. And it's because the last time we had a full reworking of the zoning for the city was 1961. And of course, at that point, there was still manufacturing. But the garment district right now, 2% of that space is being used for active garment production. So that ship has sailed. Great opportunity to create housing there. And in Midtown, a similar story, a little more complicated, because it is hard to convert kind of a 1980s building that has a big floor plate to apartments. It can be done. It needs to prioritize affordability, I would say at least at MIH standards. And it needs to come with subsidy, because otherwise it's just not going to happen.
The council people who went along with the recent rezonings would say that council deference remains in effect. So should we formally end it or not?
Did they really go along with it? Okay, that's another story. But,
Well, that's the point, I think.
I think you still have to look at things from a case-by-case basis, and we always want to respect the council members. But what I would say, if things have a regional impact, absolutely, member deference needs to go out the window. You know, I mean, yeah, innovation queens, baby.
Yeah. Being in the council member deference was important to me. I think each council member knows their districts the best, and their opinions go with a lot of weight. But I do think when it's a project that's going to have a magnitude that expands beyond that council district, that may have a citywide impact. I think about the New York Blood Center conversation we had, which was not a good one, but we overrode the council member because of the impact that the Blood Center will have for the city of New York. I think that's something that holds a lot of weight and warrants a conversation. But, you know, as a local council member, certainly my opinion mattered. And what I did when I did my rezoning and all of my ULURPs, I talked to my council members. I talked to them well before the vote came. I got all of their support, and I made sure that they were on board. And I think this city council has an opportunity to do that, and they don't talk to each other. And at the end of the day, you have a lot of neighborhoods that are different. And we are pushing the conversation when it comes to affordable housing across our city, because there are neighborhoods that have not done their fair share, that need to do their fair share. And under our leadership, under my leadership, they will do their fair share, because it's not acceptable that we build tremendous amounts of housing in saturated communities and then other neighborhoods say no. And that doesn't sit well with me in the Bronx, and I know certainly in Queens and other parts of the city. So I think council member deference is important, but I think when it does have a city-wide impact, then that should be the broader conversation.
The MTA clearly has an enormous financial crisis. The governor has proposed hiking the business-paid payroll tax, diverting casino revenues to the MTA, increasing state support, and maybe most controversially, forcing the city to contribute another $500 million to the MTA.
I don't think it's fair that the city be forced to put another $500 million in. We get every budget cycle, often hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of new unfunded mandates that Albany puts on the city. It's very easy to do for Albany, and the city ends up paying the bill. And it's not fair. We are the economic engine for the state. We send way more to Albany than we get back. And to add another $500 million on top of that, if you look at the way transit subsidy works, we are subsidizing way more per ride for suburban commuters. Not even close. And I said I'm a full supporter of Grand Central Madison and East Side Access. I was at the launch on Sunday, the full schedule yesterday. It's 300 trains a day. It's going to be a game change for the whole city. But that is primarily, not exclusively, primarily going to benefit suburban commuters. And it's not fair. We're subsidizing far less per ride for people who live and travel in the city. And to add another $5 million on that is not right. $500 million.
I would just say it's a sort of a nuanced response. And that is, it ties to your last question about housing and density and everything else. The reality is, those who know Staten Island know we don't have a subway. We have inadequate mass transit options. People are heavily dependent on cars because of the inadequate mass transit options, because of the MTA has not invested over the last 30, 40, 50 years to keep pace with the growing population of Staten Island. So when folks say they want more density, they say, well, where are the cars going to go? Because they're not jumping on a bus, they're not jumping on a subway. So we have to look at it through that prism. The second part of it is the Verrazano Bridge is a cash cow for the MTA. You practically have to take out a second mortgage to go over the bridge from Brooklyn into Staten Island, and all that money is diverted to these things in other parts of the region. So I could not in good conscience say that we should raise the cost of living on anybody in New York City until they address that disparity, which is real and happens every single day.
We all know that New Yorkers believe crime is possibly the most important problem the city faces. In your view, is the situation improving, and is there one thing you would tell the administration they need to do differently? And we'll start in Staten Island and go that way.
So I think to go full circle, got to public life in the early 90s, in part because our city was sort of out of control. And I look at the number one role of government, the most important role of government, is to protect innocent people. Whenever I see a story of somebody who's hurt, who's assaulted, and God forbid killed, I think it's one of my family members or loved ones. And we have to do everything together to ensure that we minimize and reduce that from happening every day. We proved we did it, as I mentioned. And now we see it every day, just innocent people walking the subway, getting thrown in, random acts of violence. And then there's property theft, right, on Staten Island.
We're running out of time. One thing you want them to do differently.
One thing I want them to do is basically stand up. We need reform in Albany, And we need to treat people with mental illness who are on the streets, get them the help they need, and off the streets. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I think it's immoral what's happening right now that will allow people who need mental help to keep roaming the streets and committing violent crimes too often.
Everyone has an expectation to be safe in our city, no matter where they live, what zip code they reside in. I think we've made a lot of progress over the years. I chair public safety during my time in the city council. I've seen a lot of great initiatives like NCO, YCO created. But what Mayor Adams' administration can do more is really focus on those communities that have historically been the drivers of crime. Parts of the Bronx, parts of Brooklyn, and northern Manhattan and southeast Queens. We have to go into those communities and look at some of the reasons why young adults are engaging in violence in the first place. The supply of guns, the opportunities that young people don't have, the jobs, dealing with mental health. All of those programs are important, the credible messengers, the crisis management system. So when you look at these same neighborhoods that have historically faced violent crime, and it's not changing, the residents deserve better. If we don't invest in those communities, then we are in a repetitive cycle that will continue to see violent crime throughout our city.
We are starting to make progress along several measures. Last 3 months, you can start to see subway crime has gone down significantly. We're still making progress on shootings and homicides. We have a long way to go, and as long as people don't feel safe, we have to do more. If I could pick one area to focus on, there's such an intersection between people suffering with severe mental illness, and I think New Yorkers' feelings often of being unsafe on the subway and on the street. We lost, prior to the pandemic, 400 inpatient psychiatric beds in Manhattan. Another few hundred were converted during the pandemic for COVID, and most of them have not come back. It is much too difficult in this city to get inpatient psychiatric care. People can't get admitted, they get pushed out prematurely. Even at Bellevue, which is really the crown jewel and is a disproportionate driver of psychiatric care in the city, their long-term care unit, their long-term psychiatric care unit has 19 beds. So we have got to fix this. There's people who would benefit from that kind of long-term treatment who simply aren't getting it, and that will not just be good for those individuals, it'll be good for our city as a whole.
So Comptroller Lander released a report sometime last year on the price it costs to house one individual on Rikers Island a year. Anybody want to take a guess? $500,000 a year. So you think about where we're investing money. Think about what we could do with that $500,000. We could invest in housing. That's folks' rent, all the vouchers we're talking about. We're talking about, you take after-school programming away. What do you think the kids are going to do? Idle time is the devil's playground, is what my grandmother used to say. So we have to really invest in a myriad of strategies, including mental health. That's why, we went to state ESD and said, we don't want to talk about mental health anymore. We need to do something about it. So the redevelopment of Creedmoor's campus, as we go through public sessions now, is critical to that strategy of getting those psychiatric beds back online and also doing a mixed income community as well. So we have to invest in jobs. I talked about the airport, housing. The number one issue you will hear, and I go to visit Rikers every once in a while, quietly, no press. You go in there and you speak to those young men and women in there, and they're saying, and I'm asking them, what is the number one issue you're facing when you come out of here? Housing is the number one issue. You may not know it, but there are individuals on Rikers who commit crime at certain points of the year because at least on Rikers they're guaranteed a bed and a meal. So we have to really invest in these young people, and as someone who got involved in this business because I had a 19-year-old friend who was shot and killed in Southeast Queens, I can tell you now, his story was my story, but the only difference was that I got an opportunity. So really making sure that those opportunities avail themselves for the folks in the room when you're doing development, when you're thinking of your business plan, really thinking of how we invest in these communities, because otherwise, guess what? Somebody could knock on your door. So with that being said, investment.
Anyway, if you'll join me, I don't know if somebody's going to close. Join me in a round of applause to the Borough President.
I'll just close with a quick thank you and say we'd love to have you guys back every year because this is fascinating. So thank you.